language of the computer, miracles happen.
When I left corporations, early 1990s, I found myself in the high deserts of northern New Mexico, where I live today. A beautiful part of the world. And during that time, it was one of the worst droughts in recorded history in the American desert Southwest. And a native friend called me one day, and he said, "Greg, would you like to join me at a place," and I love this language, he said, "a place where the skin between the worlds is really thin, to pray rain." And he didn't have to ask me twice. I said, "You bet." So we met at an agreed location. We hiked 135,000 acres of the most beautiful high desert sage. We came to a stone circle that had been there for so long, he didn't even know who had placed the stones there before him. And I wasn't prepared for what I saw, because my friend David took his old work shoes off. He put his naked feet inside of this circle. And he closed his eyes, and the first thing he did was he honored all of his ancestors. He literally said the words. He said, all of my ancestors are with me now, with me now. About 20 seconds later, he looked at me, and he said, "I'm hungry. You want to go get a bite to eat?" And I said, well, sure, but I said, "I thought you were going to pray for rain." And he looked at me and he said, "No." He said, "If I prayed for rain, rain could never happen. Because the moment we pray for something to occur, we've just implied, we've acknowledged it's not there now, and we may be empowering the very condition that we'd like to change." And I said, "If you didn't just pray for rain in those 20 seconds, what did you do?" And he said, "When I closed my eyes," he said, "I felt the feeling of what it feels like to stand with my feet naked in the mud in our Pueblo village, and the mud's there because there's been so much rain." And he said, "I smelled the smells of what it smells like when the rain falls off the earthen walls of our Pueblo village. And I felt the feeling of what it feels like to run through the fields of corn, and the corn is there and it's so high because there's been so much rain." He said, "I gave thanks of gratitude and appreciation for the rain that's already happened."
When you speak an affirmation, even though at first when you speak the affirmation you may not believe it, in time, as you speak it, you come into the allowing of it. And of course, there are many people speaking affirmations who are not receiving what they are speaking because they're using words and wanting the words to make it so. But the universe does not respond to your words. The universe responds to your vibration. And your emotions indicate what your vibration is.
Affirmations are magnified if we use them in our dream state, because at that moment the ego is asleep, the logical mind is resting, and therefore you have a perfect opportunity to program your future. You program your mind with these positive affirmations. Our dreams are there to resolve conflicts between the conscious and the unconscious, and they're there to regulate our moods. But what if you went to sleep believing that all is well, you are safe, everything will appear at the right time when it's supposed to?
And I think that would be very good if you all decided that too, that the decade you are in at the moment is the best decade of your life so far. If I can do it, you can do it.
I was a high school dropout, had never studied anything, suddenly became fascinated with this idea that if I could change my thinking, I could change my life. And I started to study, and I couldn't stop. I did lots of classes, lots of books, all sorts of things, so I could begin to understand how this works. And at the end of 3 years, I was eligible to become what they called in the church a licensed practitioner, which gave me the opportunity to work one-on-one with other people. And that's, I think, when the changes really started to happen, because I was began to teach other people how to do this and how to change their thinking so they could change their life. People were getting good results working with me, And then I started teaching classes. And those turned out very well. And the next thing I knew, I was doing weekend workshops for 350 people. So one of the things I began to really notice was what people said, how they said it, and what was wrong in their body. And I started to put things together. And I really trained my mind to listen to what people said. I put a list together for my own use with clients, and I'd alphabetized it, so if you came in with a problem, I could look it up quickly and see what I had written about it. And I showed it to a friend in class, and she said to me, "Oh, Louise, what a great idea. Why don't you make a little book out of it?" And I went, "Oh, really? A book?" So my first little book was done in 1976. That was Heal Your Body. And that was the mental patterns for the physical ailments in the bodies and how to make changes. I really believe that the big boys, as I call them, would not publish the book. And if they did, they probably would want to change it. Because my ideas at that time were very radical. Your thinking can change your life. And I wanted to say it the way I wanted to say it. I didn't want a word change because I knew what I was doing. So I printed the book myself. So I went to the church printer because I didn't know where else to go, and I had this little 12-page pamphlet put together. And I remember taking it to my teacher and showing it to him, and he said, "Oh, Louise, isn't that sweet? What a nice thing you've done. How many did you have printed, 200? And I said, "No, 5,000. He went, "You're crazy. You'll never sell that thing." But 2 years later, I'd sold all 5,000. I sent a free copy to every metaphysical church that I knew of, and an order form. And many of them took it. And that was my first little book.
I read her little book and I said, this would never work for me. But I came home determined to try it. At the time, I was being treated for fibromyalgia and chronic fatigue. I was self-employed. My energy levels were so low, I was barely putting in 20 hours a week, completely ignoring my children and my responsibilities. And I started her affirmation. My body now restores itself to its natural state of good health. And I saw the difference in a week. I said it all the time, and I started doing her mirror work. I would go to the mirror, and though I didn't feel it and the words stuck in my throat, I would look in the mirror and I would say, "I love you very much, Jackie. You're perfect exactly the way you are."
All right. This is going well. I have all the power. Nothing can stop me. I feel healthy and breathing, and air feels really good, and I'm accepting that I'm a part of the universe, and it gives me exactly what I ask for. Okay, so I totally tripped. It's all right. It was a positive trip.
In the moments of deepest despair, there's actually humor always. Humor lifts us up to God. It lightens up every situation. But just before you get there, there's usually this time of pain-filled joy or joy-filled pain, where you might have to break down with some deep sobs.
When someone's in trouble, I think of them just like someone who's come out of a movie, a scary movie, and they're crying. Their tears are real, their fear is real, but what they saw that caused the fear is not real, it's a movie. So what I'll do is I offer some suggestions about ways to reframe their situation or find a blessing in a seeming problem. And yes, there are challenges in life that we all go through, and there's no shame with that, but it's what you do with the challenges that counts.
Now that I know when so-called negative things happen, that they're really positive things, and that what I need to do is focus on a positive outcome, and then stay course, and then so shall I have that experience.
The way that you retrain yourself is to shift from having a fear to having a curiosity. You know, substitute the word curiosity for the word fear.
Because a lot of us, when we start doing those things to honor our soul or to express our creativity, those are really vulnerable acts. You know, the things that we intend or that we affirm for our lives, are those things that are deeply important to our soul, and so they're vulnerable. And too often we turn to people who just squash them, you know, or who tell you why it isn't going to work, or why that's a crazy affirmation, or that's a crazy intention. That's called going to the hardware store for milk. You want to go to the people who are really going to hold your hand on the journey and say, hey, I'm right there with you.
Awareness is the first step in healing or changing. When you're facing challenges on the journey, it's tempting to turn back or to blame somebody for the situation. The healing attitude, though, is to think of any external challenge as simply a reflection of your own internal resistance to change.
I'm sure everyone I know thinks I'm totally nuts. Am I right? I'll never make it through this. I'll probably flake out like I always do. Besides, this isn't even doing any good anyway.
Before the 15th and 16th centuries, all of the ships were made out of wood. Not because iron wasn't available and steel wasn't available, but because there was a belief that wood floated. So therefore you had to make ships out of things that floated. And then someone came along and said that it has absolutely nothing to do with what things are made out of. It has to do with the amount of water that is being dispersed. That's what determines whether something will float or not. And I think about that all the time, because it's in the contemplation of what you desire that you create what it is that you want to have for yourself. The law of flotation was not discovered by the contemplation of the sinking of things.
I mean, come on. I'm not one of these self-help people. I don't believe in crystals and white light and the divine feminine and angels and source energy. I mean, what is that? Let's be real. This is all just wishful thinking.
We tend to live our lives based on what we believe about ourselves, our world, our capabilities, and our limits. Where do those beliefs come from? More often than not, they come from what other people have told us. History, science, religion, culture, family. What if they're wrong?
I have all these people telling me what to do, and I mean, please. If it weren't for my mom, I'd at least have a chance. I mean, come on, where was Louise Hay when I was growing up? I had no one to show me the way to be, and my dad is no Wayne Dyer, I can tell you that much.
Anything you complain about repetitively is something that you have an unconscious intention to produce.
And now, I'm just too old to change my life. That's it. Too old, lazy, short-waisted. I should have tried to be positive years ago.
I think it really starts with realizing that you don't love yourself, that most people don't. Most people feel they're not good enough, that they haven't done it right, they won't do it right, they'll never be enough, and they're definitely not lovable. And when we come from that space, it's very hard to create things for ourselves that are really good.
Things weren't so bad before. There's nothing wrong with me. I'm fine. I'm fine the way I am. Everything was fine the way it was, and now I'm here. It just stayed the same. Everything's messed up and confused.
Well, at least I know what to expect here. It may not be the best, but at least I know how to handle this. And what's in the future might be worse. So I better not try and go out there and change things. What if I fail? What if I don't succeed?
I should just go back. I don't have time for this. I mean, I have so much to do. I'll come back later. I'll do it later. Job, all these important things. And